door number 3. Never take door number 1. You always take that lush path that isn't trodden, and you live long enough, you get to do talk to people like you.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where each episode we share the stories of individuals that are living out their bucket/life goal lists. I am your host, Roger Williams, and through hearing our guests' adventures, my goal is that you will find encouragement and empowerment to add and cross items off of your list. Welcome everybody to the show. Lots of times on our list we have exotic locations, and then some of us also have starting up our own business. What happens when those two things collide? Well, we will be talking about that with our guest today. Lya Badgley is our guest today, and she describes herself as someone that enjoys traveling with humor and grace. And so welcome to the show, Lya.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much. So, Lya, what was that one thing that you crossed off your bucket list?
I opened a restaurant in Yangon, Myanmar.
Myanmar. Okay, so are you from there? Let's go back to your origin story. How did you choose that location, that space to open up your restaurant?
Well, I'll make it very simple. I was born there to American parents and lived there as a child and returned several times throughout my life and fell in love with the culture. I was living in Cambodia and met some really interesting people who wanted to open a restaurant in Myanmar. And so they said, hey, you speak the language. Would you be interested in doing that for us? And I said, well, heck yeah. So I went to Myanmar to open a restaurant, and I did it.
And so tell us what was the timing of that? When was that? And
in mid 90s. So
okay.
I went in January of 1995 and then lived there and did that project and met my future husband and had a life there for several years and then returned back to the United States.
Okay. So one of the questions I have, in the States, we have birthright citizenship. Is that the case in Myanmar?
No, it's not. It's one of those countries where the United States does not allow dual citizenship. Okay.
So how was that? I mean, that's like the thing that like boils in my head about this is we can talk about, the process of opening a restaurant, but going someplace where you're not a citizen and opening a business, especially in some place that has had so much turmoil over the years.
Yep.
Well, how was that experience for you? Was that difficult? What did you have to go through to be the person on the ground and open that restaurant, be the owner?
Well, there's the very short answer is it's just takes a lot of patience and willingness to endure arcane bureaucracy. So the longer answer is I'm very proud of that project because it was the first project of its kind, i.e. foreign owned and independent, without a local proxy, without a local partner, since British days.
Wow.
So since the British left in 1962. So it was the first one of its kind. So basically, I was working with laws that had been on the books since literally the 1800s. So it was crazy. So I was truly inventing the wheel. It really helped that I was very respectful to the local culture, that I was proficient in the language, and that I followed the rules. And I think respect was the main thing, because at that time there were a lot of different foreign companies going in, specifically, the big hotel chains, Traders and Sedona were going in and trying to start, because the country was just then opening up to outside business influence.
Okay.
And I was there, just little old me. So, and understanding the idiosyncrasies and the challenges and the the fabulousness of Burmese culture, I was able to sort of swim upstream and accomplish things that some of the big guys weren't able to do, actually. So, for example, in 1996, it's a Buddhist country, okay, so quite conservative in some ways. So there were only 5 liquor licenses granted in the country in 1996. And 4 of them went to these big chains that I'm talking about. And one of them went to little old me, opening this restaurant just by being polite, respectful, and knowing how the system works. Because I had this background, living there as a child and growing up and having contacts that were like family members.
Sure.
So it was almost like I was a Burmese going back, but I wasn't. I was an American.
And so describe the restaurant to us a little bit. And
well,
maybe
it's still there. It's
awesome.
Still there. And so your listeners can look it up online. It's called 50th Street Restaurant, 50. And it was or still is, geared towards kind of a European clientele. Now they have more of a fusion menu, but at the time, we were going to offer pasta and pizza. It was the first pizza oven, just stuff like that. And it was geared mainly to an expat audience, as well as obviously, upper middle class Burmese. So it was. Now, of course, it's owned by a local family, so it's shifted a little bit. But we found the whole concept was to find a colonial building, a historical colonial building, and restore it and turning it into a restaurant. And so that's what we did. And it's really, really beautiful, beautiful space, and still is.
And where did that, you said you had someone that was also interested in this. How did you decide that, like, yes, I want to do this, right? You're going into another culture, you're kind of bringing in other cultures into that space. What was the deciding factor for you to want to do that and put that on your bucket list? What was the thing that goes, okay, yeah, you said earlier, yeah, I'll do that, right? Like, it's a no brainer. But for somebody else, that might be. So why was it a no-brainer?
So my case is a little unique in that I have a past with that culture. And I already knew that I loved that culture, and I already knew that I wanted to live there. So it was a no-brainer because, you're going to pay me to go and do that. And as a little further backstory for me is that I have a background in restaurants. So I was involved in the Seattle music scene in the late 70s and 80s. And so what does a starving musician, do to pay the rent? They work in restaurants.
Sure.
So I had years and years of working in restaurants and restaurant management. So that's why this company, knew to sort of take the risk. Very, very interesting story. And I'll be brief here is, so I had been living in Cambodia, and then I came back to the United States, and I was working in this restaurant. And one of the investors, British Hong Kong based investors that invested in me to go and do this project, who I met in Cambodia when I was living there, and who said, hey, why don't you go do this? And I said, hey, sure, why not? And then we lost touch completely. They happened to walk in to the Seattle restaurant where I was working. I mean, kismet, right? It was like meant to be. So it was like, of course, no brainer. So they're like, here's money, go do it. So I did.
What is the status of your bucket list? Are you still wrapping your head around the purpose of having one? Are you struggling to write your list and don't know what to put on it? Or are you looking at your list wondering which item to cross off first? No matter where you are in your bucket list journey, I'm here to assist you in becoming the head crosser-offer of your list. To learn how to work with me as your bucket list coach, visit crossingitoffpodcast.com/coaching to find out all about the personalized and affordable coaching I offer to help you live out your list. Now back to the show. So you're going into country. It's seen a lot of, well, I'll just say strife. I think that's a easy way to explain it, and not a lot of stability. And some of that has to do definitely with colonialization and that. So was there pushback once you opened that's like, no, we don't want this thing that looks like our oppressors or anything like that? Or was
Interesting
it?
question. Yeah, interesting question. I mean, definitely the legacy of colonialism throughout the world is painful and dysfunctional, a dysfunctional heritage.
Right.
And that's a whole nother podcast. But I did not experience that. And I don't believe that the restaurant did, because it was successful from the get-go. So.
And did that have to do, going back to you saying like you had connections, you had lived in the culture, that was that an important piece of that people didn't rebel and picket or whatever?
Possible. I just think that people were so hungry for anything from outside.
Mm,
And by hungry, I don't mean just for food,
right.
but just hungry for culture from outside.
So that's a very interesting. So what's the one thing that by you doing this, if someone said, hey, I want to go open a restaurant in another country, what would be that one thing that you would tell them to say, hey, you got to do X?
I think, so this is a sort of a dual reply. You have to speak the language, or at least enough of the language to show respect, which ties in with respecting the local culture and the way things are done. You just can't go in and go, well, that's stupid, I'm not going to do it that way. You have to say, okay, this is how things work here. But, people asked me, oh, well, it's a corrupt, didn't you have to pay bribes? Well, actually, I didn't, because I knew I gave gifts. I got my liquor license by giving a pair of jeans and a shirt as a gift. So it's knowing how, but I had insider knowledge, so to speak. Not everybody does. So if you, for example, wanted to go open a restaurant in Costa Rica, that wouldn't be so far-fetched, because there are many restaurants in Costa Rica opened by Americans.
Right.
So you would presumably plug in with an American who's done it and pick their brain and maybe even pay them a stipend for the information, and off you go. So Myanmar was unusual at that time because it had been closed for so long. So I don't know that just anyone could have gone in and done that. That said, there are people that did, and they had what's called a proxy. They had a local partner that did all of that managing. So if, for example, you wanted to go to, I don't know, Uzbekistan or someplace that for us Americans seems like, oh, that's so far away and exotic, when really it's not, because the world is small now. Yes. But if you did, you would probably, depending on what the laws are like, you would find a local partner but finding one that you can trust, that's always that's the flying in the ointment,
Yeah, for sure. What is something that you weren't expecting to happen that was maybe disappointing or a setback that maybe you had doing it that you may have done differently now? Or
I think I'd have to think about that for a while, because I feel so good about the project in general, good. But I would say that maybe my connection with the people that hired me to go be the project manager to do it. I was very naive about contracts and about, whenever you get into business with a group of attorneys, you're going to probably come out on the short end of it. so I think in hindsight, because my contract, the reason I'm not still living there is because the things happened. The so-called Asian economic flu happened, in the 90s, and the Thai baht, the currency, was devalued, and so my whole contract got readjusted. I mean, they were good about it, but anyway, in hindsight, if I had to pull something out of my hat, that would be it, is just making sure that, if someone is paying you to go do it, that you understand, all of the technicalities of the contract.
And so what would be the opposite of that? What would be something that shockingly surprised you in a good way?
I met my husband.
Okay, that's fair.
So
That's totally fair.
that was completely independent of the project, but I opened a door. I opened a portal, a literal portal for both ways, for local people as well as foreign people, to come and enjoy one another. I
Besides,
encourage everyone should go to Myanmar. It's a fabulous place. The people are amazing.
it's awesome to know. So what's like the one takeaway, like life altering thing or something that changed you or transformed you in this process that you carried over into the next thing that you did?
I think confidence. I had no idea that I could successfully do something like that. I didn't have a business background. I was an artist. I was a creative. I was not a businesswoman. That I could successfully do a project that arguably hadn't been done before, and it's still there. The restaurant is still there. I don't own it, but whatever groundwork I and my team were able to do, it was good enough to be there like 40 years later or whatever.
Yeah,
it
that's
is,
amazing. Yeah, with
I
anything,
mean,
that's amazing these days.
how many restaurants can say that?
Well, that's for sure. Definitely, it's a very difficult business. Um, what what have you done with that knowledge that you've collected through that experience? How has that impacted your world after leaving it?
Well, I think having a certain amount of confidence, and uh, sort of, well, definitely shameless plug for my book, The Foreigner's Confession, which is actually based on my work that I did right before I went to open the restaurant in Cambodia. I mentioned Cambodia earlier. So I had a very interesting job there as director of the Cornell University's archival project at Tuol Sleng Museum of Genocide, which if anyone has seen the Killing Fields
Right.
or anything like that, the Khmer Rouge were some pretty extreme characters.
Right.
And so this was a prison for high-ranking Khmer Rouge. And so what my job was actually microfilming the confessions, the actual confessions.
Wow.
From these Khmer Rouge, extracted under torture. Very dark, very, very extreme, very different than opening a restaurant.
No doubt.
So that project, opening a restaurant, I think, and then doing this project combined to take me out of my sort of sense of what is possible as a human being to accomplish. And I had been a writer before, but actually taking, I've done a whole bucket load of interesting things in my life. You live long enough,
Yes.
you take door number 3, you never take door number 1, you always take that lush path that isn't trodden. And you live long enough, you get to do, talk to people like you about bucket list things.
Tell me what the book's about real quick, because it does have, you alluded to it, I think, in what you just said.
So the book is it's not my story, but it's a sort of a dual timeline story about an American woman who goes to Cambodia, sort of fleeing a painful experience in her past. And she discovers this really mysterious thing that leads her to the the story of another woman who's actually from Yugoslavia who ends up in Cambodia as a Khmer Rouge herself. So this dual timeline entwines on itself, and they basically find redemption through, though they never meet one another, they never talk to one another, but they find redemption through knowledge of one another. So I'll leave it like that. It's a little bit of a mystery. So.
Nice. So besides opening this restaurant, doing that project, and writing this book, what would you consider the next thing that you would like to cross off your list? What would that be?
Book number 2.
Book number 2. I said besides writing.
Besides writing books?
Is there something else besides writing books and opening up restaurants that you'd like to do?
Well, we're going to Belgrade, Serbia on the 5th for my brother-in-law's wedding. So I would like to successfully go there and come back without having to deal with COVID.
Yes.
But so that's a shorter term. But I think greater sort of is just to learn. I mean, I'm encroaching on old ladydom here, and I would like to finally figure out a way to just be okay. It's really hard as human beings to just be okay with who we are and what we're doing and where we're at, and so that's my biggest bucket list.
Yeah, being content is huge. I think it's a large component in life that we tend to learn later on. We just need to learn earlier, I think, sometimes.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for being here. Where can folks find more information about you and the restaurant that I can put in the show notes so that people can get to you real quick and click away?
So if you Google 50th Street Restaurant, Myanmar, you will find the Facebook page for the restaurant, and you can look at pictures and things like that.
Great.
I know they have open mics. I mean, how cool. And as far as my book goes, I have an author page and I have a website, and and Instagram and all of that we have to do in this day and age. And would love, people to check it out.
Awesome. We will put all those things in the show notes so that people can just click them super easy. Lya, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being brave in your life and doing all the things you've done. And if there's something you're really excited about you've crossed off your bucket list in the future, please let us know.
Thank you, Roger.
As a reminder to our listeners, in this episode's show notes, you will find links to learn more about this week's guest and information on how you can cross this item off of your list. You can follow my adventures of crossing items off of my bucket list on Instagram and Facebook. And as always, new episodes of this podcast are available to stream every Friday morning. We will meet you here next week. And until then, keep living out your